stay in the book of Mark, but I'm going to jump around with some supplemental material from Matthew, Luke, and John. As it was morning, this is after they had arrested Jesus the night before, as soon as it was morning, the chief priests had a consultation with the elders and the scribes and the whole council. So everybody who was engaged in the illegal arrest of Jesus got together with the rest of those political factions, and they all sat down, they talked about what they were going to do, and then they decided they would bind Jesus, lead him away, and they handed him over to Pilate. Now, I don't imagine that the Jewish leadership agreed on much of anything, ever. You had the Sadducees, you had the Pharisees, you had the Essenes, you had the Zealots, and those are the four that we hear the most about. But even with those four, there's other little political groups. They all had different viewpoints. The scribes did one thing, the priests did something. But they've all come together and they've all decided the one thing that's got to happen is Jesus has got to go. So they get him, they arrest him, they tie him up, they haul him off to Pilate. Pilate asked him, talking to Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Now, the interesting thing about this question is, if there was a king, a military king, and Pilate's in charge of the army, it's Pilate's job to kill the guy. Right? He's supposed to keep the Romans in charge. He's supposed to keep the Romans in their position of power. We learn from some of the other Gospels that when when they show up at Pilate's place with Jesus, Pilate says, "What did? What did he do?" "Well, he wasn't a criminal. We wouldn't hand him over to you." That's not really an answer. What did he do? What did he do? Did he lead a riot? Did he get an army together? Did he, is he a troublemaker? Is he a thief? Is he a murderer? Does he pickpocket? Does he shoplift? No, none of that stuff comes out. They tell Pilate, "Hey, he said he's our king. He's a Messiah, the Son of God." And Pilate goes, "Whoa, wait a second. Pilate also had his wife come and say to him, "Look, don't have anything to do with this innocent man. I've been troubled tonight in a dream about him. Don't have anything to do with this guy." So Pilate is sitting in his palace, and he has got the Jewish leaders, the people who none of them like him. Not one of them standing there like this guy. They don't like his policies. They don't like his taxes. They don't like his soldiers. But they're all there united together that this Jesus guy is a bad dude. We wouldn't have turned him over to you if he wasn't a criminal. We've got a law. He said he's the Son of God. For that, he's got to die. So Jesus is standing there before Pilate. Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Are you the king of the Jews? In one of the accounts, Jesus says to Pilate, "Do you say this of your own accord, or are you saying this because others told you this about me?" Jesus has done nothing that a king would do. 3 years of public ministry, they know who he is. He's some preacher going around healing folks. Never in that time did a report go back to Pilate or any of the other Romans that Jesus was out there putting together an army. They would have squashed him earlier if that was going on. Never did a report come out that this guy's out there robbing people to raise money. The Romans would have stepped in and they would have stopped that. Never did a report come that Jesus said don't pay taxes, although in one of the Gospels it says, yeah, he said not to pay taxes. If he had said that, the Romans would have come after him. It's kind of like the IRS today. They don't like anybody interfering with their cash payments. None of that stuff happened, folks. All of it, they're firing off all these accusations. And Jesus is standing there, and he's got nothing to say. Jesus didn't say that's not true. Jesus didn't try to argue with them. Jesus stood there with his mouth shut. Pilate was amazed at that, because usually when somebody comes in and they're arguing that someone's a criminal or they're bad to or whatever, or they did this or they said that, the very first thing that most people do is they start arguing back. I didn't say that. You misunderstood what I said. I was misquoted. That was taken out of context. If you want an example of that, just, pick up the newspaper and see what some politician has said. Pilate is amazed that Jesus doesn't say anything. Verse 4, Pilate asked him again, "Have you no answer? See how many charges they bring against you?" Don't you understand what they're saying? They're saying bad stuff upon bad stuff upon bad stuff. Jesus didn't make any further reply. Pilate was amazed at this. Pilate was amazed. There was no fancy legal defense. There was no Johnny Cochran up there going, "If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit." There was no snappy legal representation. There was no last-minute aha moment like you have in a TV show. Jesus just stood there, didn't have anything to say. Now, as part of the Passover festival, one of the things that the Romans did, and they did this to kind of appease the people, one of the things that was their tradition was the governor would pardon somebody. If there's somebody in jail that's popular with the people, they would pardon them as a way of making the people happy. Now, I don't know what the criteria was that they used for making that decision, but they would let somebody go. Now, Pilate his way of doing this was he'd let them have anybody they asked for. Now, a man called Barabbas was in prison with the rebels who had committed murder during the insurrection. So Pilate gets the worst guy they got. Here's a guy who was out there murdering folks when they were in rebellion. And he didn't say killing Roman soldiers. Somebody's out there killing Jewish citizens. They knew him for a murderer. They knew Barabbas as a bad dude. You wouldn't think this would be a popular guy. So, let me just keep reading here. So the crowd came and asked Pilate to do for them what according to his custom, which means we're going to pardon somebody. Then he answered him, being Pilate, "Do you want me to release for you the King of the Jews?" Now, who is Jesus? If you don't know he's the Son of God, you don't know any of that, but you're just some regular Joe or Joseph because you're Hebrew, and you have no real idea who this Jesus guy is. However, you've heard about him. Well, he seems to be a nice preacher. He seems to be a good guy. He heals people that are sick. He casts out demons. He helps blind people see. If that's all you know about him is the talk, is the gossip, and you got a murderer over here, and you got this guy who's just generally been a nice guy for 3 years helping people out. And all he does is walk around, and he's got, between 12 and however many other guys are walking around with him. And they probably don't have the best shower facilities, but you don't kill somebody for that. That's who Jesus is. If you don't know any better, you haven't read this 100 times before you got here today, you haven't heard Dozens of other preachers preach on this passage of Scripture. You don't know who Jesus is. You haven't been in Sunday school. All you know is the common talk. He's just some nice dude. If nothing else, he's a really good doctor, right? Because he can do these things. Now, Pilate says, do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews? Verse 10, for he realized it was out of jealousy that the chief priest had handed him over. Now understand that. Pilate knows that the reason that all the religious leaders don't like Jesus is because Jesus is more popular than he is, or they are. Pilate knows enough about what's going on. Jesus hasn't been running around doing stuff secretly. Pilate knows what the talk is. Pilate knows what the rumors are. Pilate may never have met the guy before this, but Pilate's sitting there going, yeah, you know, he seems to be a good guy, and he's got this traveling healing show going. And apparently, he doesn't ask anybody for money, and he heals people. He's not a threat politically at all. See, we all know what has to happen because we've all read Scripture and we've gone over this and we understand the plan of salvation and we have all of that. But Pilate's sitting there, and this is just a good guy. Pilate has not read the Bible. It hasn't been written yet. Well, the Old Testament was, but this part wasn't. Pilate doesn't know what the story is. All he's got is a guy there who seems like a nice guy. He's got some good moral teachings, and he's not a problem to anybody. So Pilate says, hey, you know, I know that they only turned him over because they're jealous about him. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have them release Barabbas for them instead. They had their own little PR group out there stirring up people. Who do you want released? So Pilate spoke to them again. What do you wish me to do with the man you call the King of the Jews? What do you, all you good, religious, Sabbath school attending, synagogue going, temple worshiping, people of God, want me to do with your king? The man you call King of the Jews. Pilate isn't asking a bunch of Romans. Pilate isn't asking a bunch of Palestinians. Well, he is, because it's all Palestine. If you live there, you're Palestinian. Do with that what you want. Pilate isn't asking anybody other than God's people and the religious leaders of God's people, what do you want me to do with this guy? For 3 years, Jesus has been running around healing people, casting out demons, having some nice sermons, and that's what he's done. What do all you good religious people want me to do with this guy? Now, if nothing else, Jesus has proven he's a prophet. He has not proven he's the Son of God. He doesn't prove he's the Son of God till he gets up out of that grave. That hasn't happened yet. But what do all you people want me to do with this guy who's at least a prophet? And they scream, crucify him. Pilate asked them, why? Can you imagine? You're the political leader. You're in charge of everything. You know that this is a trumped up nonsense kangaroo court that they've had for him. You know that this guy has done nothing wrong. You've never heard thing bad one about Jesus. They're all screaming, crucify him, crucify him. And he asks this question, why? What evil has he done? What has he done? But they shouted all the more, crucify him. There's no logic. If you're ever in court, and you've got someone there and it's a criminal matter, when they bring the criminal in, he sits in his spot, and the prosecutors come in, and they have what's called an indictment. An indictment is a list of the charges of the things that you've supposedly done. Now they've got evidence, and they've got witnesses and whatever else that they're going to bring into to say, hey, this is what this guy did. This is what he deserves. Pilate's still trying to figure out what he did. Now, I believe it's the Gospel of John. If you flip over there, which you don't need to, but if you flip over to the Gospel of John, he's the Son of God. He claims to be the Son of God. Pilate gets a little bit nervous right there. But everybody in the crowd is yelling, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. You've got a mob of people screaming for Jesus' blood because the chief priest stirred him up for it. Pilate, in one of the versions, says, look, I've beaten him. I've whipped him. Can't we let it go at that? I've punished him. See, let's just release him. He's ticked you off, so I had him half beaten to death. Why don't you just let that go at that? That's not good enough. So Pilate, this is got to be one of the saddest verses in the whole Bible here. So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd. Jesus wasn't guilty under Roman law. Jesus wasn't guilty under Jewish law. Jesus wasn't guilty in a court of common sense of anything. He wasn't guilty of anything. But Pilate, that guy who's in charge of everything, has all the Roman army. He's got all the power. He can do whatever he wants. He's the boss. He can do whatever he wants. You want to know something? Just because you're the boss and you can say what you want, you can do what you want, and you can control everything you want, that doesn't mean that what you say is going to be right, true, just, or wise. And Pilate, although he's got all the power, Pilate caves in. He totally sells Jesus out. He knows it's not right. There is no principle of law under which this is right, Roman or Jewish. There is no principle of justice under which this is right. There is no inkling of common sense where you go, yeah, this person probably deserves something to happen to him. But Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released Barabbas for them. Then he flogs Jesus again, after he's been beaten a couple different times. He flogs Jesus again, hands him over to be crucified. That's as far as I'm going to read today, because that's a natural break in where the scriptures are. And because I went kind of long last week, so we got to even this out a little. Who do you want to satisfy? If you're married, fellas, every once in a while you might want to satisfy your wife. Ladies, if you're married, every once in a while you might want to satisfy your husband. Kids, try satisfying your parents sometime. It'll be different. The shock may kill them. You'll inherit early. Right? If you got a job, you got to satisfy the boss. But what if you're the boss? What if it's your decision to make? Pilate was the boss. He was in charge. What do you want to do with the King of the Jews? Pilate could have turned him loose. I remember, I can't remember the name of the movie, this just popped into my head. I remember a movie where one of the family members of the person who had been killed was testifying where the person who killed him was right there. And in a case of what is probably best described as the he needed killing defense, the person who was closest to the family member looked right at the murderer and he looked right at the judge, and he says, "You turn him loose. You turn him loose. Yeah, he did all this bad stuff, but he did it for a good reason. You turn him loose." Now, that's a very powerful thing to have in a movie because it's a scene where you're going, oh yeah, that's a good thing. This is, that whole he needed killing, maybe what the guy who did it did was wrong, but it was for a good reason. But that's not the case with Jesus. Jesus didn't do anything wrong. Jesus didn't do anything wrong. Why did Jesus need killing? Because he ticked off some politicians. He ticked off some self-righteous, self-important people who didn't like what he was saying. So you're the boss. You get to make a decision. What are you going to decide to do with Jesus? What are you going to do with this King of the Jews? Every one of us is boss of our own life, even if we have other bosses we answer to. And every day, you have an opportunity to obey the gospel. And I don't just mean get saved. Obeying the gospel is something that goes on every day in every aspect of your life. What do you want to do with the King of the Jews? Are you going to believe in him? Are you going to put your faith in him? By putting your faith in him, are you going to do what you're supposed to do? When the rubber meets the road, are you going to go to work? I don't always do good with stuff like that. That's why I think God has me preach this stuff, to remind me and convict me. When it comes to Jesus, there's only one wise decision. There's only one. You're either going to put your faith in him and obey him, or you're going to say, crucify him, get rid of him, we don't need him. That's it. That's your choice. Obey or reject. One of the other gospel versions, not Mark, Pilate's there and he's struggling. He's in a conversation with Jesus, and Jesus tells him, "The person who handed me over to you is guilty of the greater sin." Guilty of a greater sin. The Jewish leaders, they're going to get theirs. What Jesus didn't say was that Pilate wasn't guilty of sin. By saying that the people who turned him over were guilty of a greater sin, it kind of implies that Pilate's sinning. We don't know if he ever repented of that. We don't know if he ever was sorry for that. But he sinned. And when you do anything other than accept Jesus Christ and obey him, you're sinning too. That's my talk for today. If you'd like to get right with Jesus, there's folks here who are happy to talk with you. If you're saved and you need help fixing some stuff in your walk, there's people here that are happy to talk with you. If you need anything from us,